Hello and welcome back again to All Therapists Are Jerks. This is Ulland.
And this is Jo.
In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the how skills of mindfulness, as the previous couple podcasts had to do with the what skills and what mindfulness is. Today's going to be more about how to do mindfulness.
Right. And so, again, as a reminder, because I never know what order people are listening to these in, mindfulness.
Well, they're numbered. They should be doing an order.
Well, they should, but then we're being all judgmental and stuff. And
I guess that was judgmental.
Yeah, a little bit.
All y'all listen to them in whatever order you deem okay, as long as you're participating.
One mindfully in the moment, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. So just a reminder that the mindfulness skills are the core skills in DBT, that all skills build off of mindfulness. We have to have awareness in order to make changes necessary. So we're going to talk today about the how skills. The how skills are how we do the what skills. So that's not confusing at all.
At all.
No. So if you did listen to the what skills are observe, describe, and participate. So we do each of those things independently of one another. However, the how skills we do in conjunction with one another. So we observe, describe, and participate non-judgmentally, one mindfully, and effectively. So all three of the how skills are applied to each what skill.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
All right, cool.
Yes.
So non-judgmentally, when we're talking about non-judgmentally, we're refraining from evaluation and evaluative and discriminative statements. You want to give some examples there, Ulland?
So it's very cold outside.
Oh, that's a good one. Well, you should put on some socks.
She had an angry tone.
That I don't know if that's non-judgmental. That might actually be...
Well, I don't know if it's an angry tone. What if she's anxious? Right? Like, I don't know. Like, you could say your tone was tense, you had a clipped speaking voice, the volume was louder, but I say angry tone.
All right. That's fair. So then one mindfully, focusing on one thing at a time in the present moment. I think this one's really important because there's so much, I don't know what the word is, like emphasis placed on being able to multitask.
Mm-hmm.
So when people multitask, that's actually a misnomer. We're not actually multitasking. We're splitting attention very rapidly between multiple things or among multiple things. And so a lot of companies, I think it's funny how multitasking is reinforced. A lot of companies are looking for individuals who are good multitaskers. Whereas if you're familiar with mindfulness, you would like to have someone who's actually one mindful, because tasks are more likely to be completed quicker, more effectively, and well.
Right. The idea of generalists. And generalists are individuals who actually shift attention a bit faster. And on average, women tend to be more generalizers, and they're actually better at shifting attention. So in society, we often go, women, are good at multitasking.
Yes, the queen of multitasking.
The queen of multitasking, right. Well, it's not really so much that women are better at multitasking, but what they are better at is shifting attention quickly from one thing to another, which makes a lot of sense, evolutionarily speaking, of like how many things you have to juggle while trying to, take care of a baby, but also be providing and working on things that are necessary for other people around you. Whereas males tend to be like specific with things. We get hyper-focused on things, and actually we have a hard time shifting our attention once we've got our attention. These are, obviously, you could say like gender stereotypes to some extent, but there's research to back them up. And some men are better generalizers than others, and some women are better at specificity than others. But on average, you find these things to happen.
Right. And as we go through the how skills, we're going to break them down a little bit more as we go along. So we're just kind of giving you a general overview of each.
Right.
And then the last how skill is effectively. Effectively is doing what works and being skillful in the moment. And sometimes it's just enough. You got to do just enough to be effective in the moment. This also tends to go back to a quote that I've had in the past of, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Mm-hmm.
When we want to be effective, we have to give up that willingness to be right. Even if we don't agree with a situation, we still have to be able to behave effectively. So I may not agree with decisions that are made, on a higher level at work. However, I still need to be able to have a job and help the girls that I help. So I need to participate effectively.
Right.
Even if I don't agree.
Right. Well, I want to go back. I like that you use the word just enough,
mm-hmm.
effectively. Because you think about perfectionism, it's like it's been overdone.
Mm-hmm.
Spending way too much time on something and providing something that's so overly detailed.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about just enough. It's not overdoing it. So effectively is not like perfection. Effectively is like, what did it require? Did you provide just that?
Right. So the rationale for non-judgment, why would we want to be non-judgmental? So right now we're going to just kind of break down non-judgmental. Judgments can have damaging effects on ourselves and others, and they also really inflame negative emotion. So when we're being judgmental, especially toward ourselves or someone else, we're increasing shame and anger.
Right.
And we also get stuck in very rigid patterns when we're judgmental. Like, it shouldn't be like that. So if you hear a lot of words like should or I can't,
you're often closing down options. So we think about like judgment as like, it shouldn't be this way, so then I'm not open to other ways that it could be. You have these expectations, and when something doesn't fit, you rigidly kind of block it. Like you're not going to be open to it. You can't be flexible. It's like a cornerstone of rigidity almost.
Right. And we want to really steer clear from using judgmental terms. Mm-hmm. So like, he's an asshole, she's a bitch, those are great. Behaviorally, what does that look like? What does that mean? You may not like someone, so when we start labeling people rather than describing behaviors, that's another form of judgment. So it's not just should or shoulding, it's also labeling people.
Well, and once you have the label, you tend to look for evidence to support the label.
Correct.
Rather than focusing on behaviors, we're always looking at the behaviors to know what's going on. You use the label to exclude behaviors that don't fit with the label, but then to reinforce the label through behaviors consistent with the label.
Right. And the other reason that we'd really want to be non-judgmental as much as possible is because describing and discovering the causes of things works better than judging. So if I can figure out why something is occurring, I can change that thing, as opposed to saying, like, ascribing blame or fault. Mm-hmm. It's harder to change it then. Or if it's just this universal, well, my life sucks, or I'm trying to think of exactly how I want to say it. Like, I'm just a victim, like the mm-hmm. universe just happens and I don't have any say so on it, or it is what it is in that passive kind of way. Mm-hmm. When we're doing that, we're not actually moving toward change. So we're not discovering the causes of it. If it's right or it's wrong, if it's bad, it's too vague.
Right. It doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, it's like a concept and a category rather than a description.
Right.
And then, of course, being non-judgmental is fundamental to mindfulness. We talked about that in our general introduction to mindfulness. The whole goal is not to attach to the judgments or judge the judging. We'll recognize that we have judgments to begin with.
It's sort of like when judgmental, you're taking on all this. So you see something in the world, but you're taking on all this extra stuff that didn't happen in the world. It happened in your mind.
Right. And so there's a big difference between discriminative and evaluative judgments. Mm-hmm. So I think that we do have to have discriminative judgments in some senses, especially whether something is safe or unsafe, whether it's beneficial or whether it's bad for us, quote, bad, detrimental. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing discriminative judgments, we are determining if things are the same or different. So, like when you're looking at diamond rings, there's clarity, quality, cut, and that is a discriminative judgment. Is how do I compare this thing to that thing? Mm-hmm. Whether something meets a specific standard or whether something fits the facts. So this would be discriminative judgments. Discriminations are necessary.
Right.
And discriminations can be beneficial or they can be detrimental. Mm-hmm. So if you're evaluating or if you're discriminating that something is less than, that could be actually detrimental in the long run. But then evaluative judgments are a little bit more of the judgments that are definitely detrimental. Those come from things being based on opinion rather than objective facts. So when we're doing discriminative, that's objective, quality, cut, clarity. Those are all objective measures. Yeah,
you also look at like metrics. There's an actual metric for something.
Right. Measurements. And when we're doing evaluative, it's like it's good or bad. That was a crappy diamond ring versus that had lesser quality. Mm-hmm. And it also, we're ascribing more subjective value to things rather than an objective value. And it's often based on opinions, biases, our own personal values. So this is, I think, if we go off, I don't know if we want to go off on a big, huge political or, religious tangent, but a lot of times when we are so invested in our values being right, mm-hmm. it causes a lot of division.
Right.
Rather than being able to, this is the way I'm choosing to live my life. We can't broad blanket our morals onto other people. And then that, like, mine are right and yours are wrong, mine are good and yours are bad. And, these are the things that, create so much tension and division rather than searching for that synthesis. It's basically anti-dialectical.
Right. I do think that some values are more universal, so they're evaluative, but at the same time universal, like, homicide, like whoever really agrees that that's a great thing. It's not really, but we start getting into more detailed and specific types of values, mm-hmm. and you start seeing more and more division over things that aren't I mean, if it's not universal, it's gonna be divisive.
Right. And I think, not to open a can of worms, but I think that happens with religion a lot. Like, my way of believing is the right way of believing, and everybody else is going to go to hell, or they're amoral, or they don't see things the right way. And I know that's not the function of most faiths, so I want to be really clear about that. But when we get really stuck into these moral dilemmas of like, this is the right way to be, even, kind of funny, most recent experience when we were doing one of our group or family lectures, I sometimes have colorful language. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got was, watch your language. There's no need to take the name of the Lord in vain, especially around teenagers. Well, that is that family's value, and I can respect that family's value. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's not necessarily my value. I want to be able to communicate, and sometimes I do so with colorful language. It doesn't make me a bad person, so when we're attaching good and bad to our values.
Right, and attaching values to words. So cuss words, they're bad, but like they're phonetics, like other words, but we judge them as bad.
Right. And I think sometimes...
And I think it's funny, the worst ones are Germanic. Right, the Latin ones don't sound so bad, but the German ones sound like, oh my, you said, what did you say?
Yeah, they're harsh.
I like Germans, by the way. I'm not against Germans.
Well, that's good, because I'm more than half German. We'd have a problem.
We would. Uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, if you didn't like Germans, because that would be evaluative judgment.
Well, I don't want to be black and white about it.
Boom. Don't you have research on people who cuss? This is a tangent.
You just want to be supported in your statement, don't you?
I want to be supported for being creative and intelligent.
Okay, so it's ironically, so my own parents, actually it's kind of ironic, wouldn't agree with this. So my dad's a truck driver who didn't swear.
Which is really funny when I say I swear like a truck driver. And you're
trucker.
like, yeah, my dad
maybe
didn't
cuss like a sailor? Maybe sailors cuss, but my dad didn't. He didn't like the F words. He'd say F-bombs. Rarely would he cuss. But there's actually studies. So, because Hart was like, well, you got a vocabulary. That's what your vocabulary is for. Because he used to like...
Use your words.
Use your words. Use your words, kid. Well, he was interesting because he would take he'd write down 20 vocabulary terms he didn't quite know, and he would take them on the truck with him, and gone for the week and come back the weekend. So he'd memorize the words, and then he would practice using the words in conversation on the CB or at a truck stop or whatever, and come home. And so it was really cool. And I used to have to read Stephen King books and read enough of them so he'd have them to bring with him each week. But he had this idea that, oh yeah, if you cuss, it's not, you're not using vocabulary. But it's interesting, people with larger vocabularies often cuss more. And there's a relationship between cussing and intelligence, that actually intelligent people cuss more. And, cussing is emotionally expressive.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's part of it, is it's a way to express emotion, and it doesn't decrease your level of intellect or destroy your vocabulary. But it's judged to be that way and assumed to be that way. And it doesn't mean, it doesn't make it any less offensive to someone who's offended by those words.
Exactly. Both things can be true.
And to judge somebody by their use of words, whether kosher or not kosher, also isn't fair.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the other thing, too, is the energy with which things are said.
Actually, it's interesting. People who cuss are more trustworthy.
That is interesting.
So if you have a long conversation with someone about something emotionally intense and they never cuss, there's actually a part of it doesn't really feel honest. Whereas if you're talking about something emotionally intense or important to somebody and they do cuss, you actually trust them more.
That was interesting. I just thought it was street cred with the girls that we work with, but hey.
Well, I think it does work that way because I think they're finally hearing the intensity of what their experience has been and that it's okay. And also the idea that if we're adults who are supposed to be, quote, professional or that their parents have put the stamp of approval on, but then if we cuss, that's fallibility.
Right.
Also that we're willing to be risky, a little bit counterculture, just enough, which is, I think, street cred, but also it's honest. If I cuss, I cuss. It's hard for me to...
It's my form of alternate rebellion.
That's good. I don't think it through that much, like you. I'll just get myself in trouble. But no, I think to me, genuinely in the moment, that if that's how I feel, that's what I think. That's what I have to say. And if I start really filtering, I think, what I say, to be honest, I think I feel less genuine in the moment. It's too much for me to track. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, I feel there's so much to track already that I can't pretend to be somebody else and have a completely different approach when I'm with someone than I would normally have with someone else. And It's not a boundary issue to me. How I use my language isn't so much about boundaries. Boundaries are more about, where you are emotionally and how you're interacting with someone. It's not so much about vocabulary or language.
Well, and I think we should be clear that when we're talking about cussing, we're not talking about calling people cuss words. So it's not...
they're emotional expression.
Right. So it's not like we're running around calling people, bitches and assholes and things like that. Oh. So not name calling, but dropping a F-bomb every now and again. Never killed anyone to my knowledge.
Well, I mean, I know what it feels like. The first time I walked onto the Child and Adolescent Day Treatment Center at the organization I work at 10 years ago, fresh out of training, I walk in and there's this cute little African-American girl. I mean, she looked like probably 5, but frankly, she probably was 7 just because of like inner city stuff and trauma and stuff. She just looks up at me and she's like, bitch. It was like, the only thing that come to mind, I was like,
welcome to work.
I know. The only thing I said to her was like, well, you don't even know me yet. Like, you could be right, but like, you don't know this yet.
Yeah.
Give me a chance.
Are you clairvoyant? Did you figure me out already?
This 30-year-old anxious white dude walks on the unit, and that's how, that's her world, and here's my world, and then collision. Yeah, she was pretty funny. I liked her. She's great.
So I guess back to non-judgmentally. Did we even talk about how to do non-judgmentally? Maybe, maybe not. We'll go for it. If it's repetition is good for you.
So how to be non-judgmentally? You see, but you don't evaluate.
Acknowledge the difference between helpful and harmful.
You also want to acknowledge your values, wishes, thoughts, and emotions without evaluation.
I think that one's the hard one because there's so many shoulds. I shouldn't feel this way. I'm overreacting. I'm a drama queen. Nobody else feels the way I do. We start throwing judgments into our experience and we make our suffering worse.
I think like maybe an example would be like, they should respect me. Or maybe it's more, I want to be respected. Mm-hmm. Like something happens with, they should be respecting me, that energy versus like, I do want to be respected. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't respectful.
Right.
It's a different way. You can recognize the wish, but you're not having the expectation other people are, living to your values, your wishes and emotions and thoughts.
Right. So the do's of being non-judgmental is letting go of good and bad, accepting reality as it is, which we've already talked about. We have another podcast on reality acceptance skills. Mm-hmm. Replace evaluative statements with factual descriptions of what is. So we actually had a resident the other day. I asked her if she was done with her orientation packet. And she said, she kind of said, I don't know. And I know when this particular resident says, I don't know, it means she doesn't want to tell me the answer because she's afraid I'm going to be upset with her. Mm-hmm. She doesn't like to disappoint anyone. And I said, okay, let me rephrase. What are the barriers to getting your orientation packet done? And her answer is, I'm stupid. And I was like, okay, so you're having the thought that you're stupid. Can you, describe for me why you have the thought or the interpretation that you're stupid? So that was an evaluative statement. I'm stupid. Well, I'm stupid is a characteristic, and it's probably not as changeable as I actually need support understanding this information. And I was like, you just got here. We plopped down all this information in front of you. We're like, hey, I kind of explained it to her. It's like you were given a test written half in English, half in Spanish, and you don't, you maybe can stumble on a few words and figure out what a few words mean. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of a whole different language. When you first come onto the unit and we're like all DBT immersive, it's like being plopped into an environment that speaks a language that you don't speak. And it's not reflective of whether you're stupid or not. You don't have the knowledge that you need right now. Mm-hmm. And, that helped her kind of check the facts and reduce the shame. But we moved from a description of what the barriers were rather to an evaluation of I am stupid.
So some of the don'ts of non-judgmentally is, don't focus on the value or the worth of something or whether it's deserved or not deserved. Mm-hmm. Also, not really shitting on yourself or others, how other people should be or you should be. And if it happens, just to say not to do something is not really helpful because, well, then what am I supposed to do? Well, really you're trying to replace the shoulds when they happen with like, well, what are your feelings, urges, and desires? Like I said before, like this should have been respectful or, well, I want respect. Or I want to be treated fairly, or, those are what I want, and may not happen sometimes.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really important about being non-judgmental is recognizing that we are judgmental. By nature, our minds are extremely judgmental.
Right.
We do evaluative and discriminative judgments all the time. It's recognizing that we're being judgmental and not judging the judgments.
Right.
So like, I'm having a lot of judgmental thoughts right now. For me, that's a cue that something's going on. If I'm not super in tune to my body, if I'm kind of running on autopilot, I'm not being mindful. And all of a sudden I recognize that my thoughts are judgmental. Instead of being like, God, I'm such a bitch, which I have said about myself in the past. I can stop and say, okay, so my thoughts are really judgmental right now. I'm wondering, like, what is that actually telling me? What am I actually angry about? And then I have choices on how I want to move forward with it. So it's not that your mind becomes non-judgmental. It's that you become aware of your judgments and then you have choices in how you choose to respond. But if we just glom on to the judgments or just, categorize, thinking concepts and categories of good and bad, all or nothing, black and white, we get stuck and we increase our suffering.
Do you really think that that you're just going to be judgmental internally, that it doesn't get better? Like if you're getting really good at not letting your judgments outside, that doesn't really change your inner experience?
Well, I think the inner experience improves for sure, but I think it's pretty naive to say that you're never going to have discriminative and evaluative judgments. What, you're looking at me like I'm cray-cray.
Well, no, I'm just like saying, like, well, like maybe I'm not super judgmental to begin with. Maybe, I don't know. Because and then I don't know if that's chicken or the egg thing. Like, am I not really too much of a judgy person, or I've been more open that way? Or did I probably was more, obviously teenager, more judgmental than I am now. But I don't know that I felt like I had a real problem with being judgmental.
So you're meaning to tell me you don't ever say that things shouldn't be the way they are? That's a judgment.
Of course I say that.
You've
heard me say that.
I know. That's why I was calling you out on it.
Oh, here we go. I know what I'm doing. I'm getting all confused, like name calling or judging people.
Right.
I judge reality all the time.
Right. Exactly. So when that's
particularly when it's
still
not going my way, then it should be some other way, my way.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you're not judgmental at all.
All right, cool. You got me. I'll keep working on it.
That happens. It happens. To deny that it happens I think that even people who are Zen masters are still judgmental. And I think Marsha Linehan would tell you that she still has judgments. She is a Zen master. You still have judgments.
Yeah, they're like the worst. Zen masters.
Zen masters? Oh.
No, I just like the meta humor in that one.
Yeah, that was pretty meta. All right, moving on. So the next how skill is one mindfully. So the rationale behind one mindfully is that the pain of the present moment is enough pain for anyone.
Oh, totally.
Which means we don't need to go back into the past and, throw in the kitchen sink on top of the painful moment that we're already experiencing. And we don't need to go to the future and catastrophize like, oh, well, if I don't figure this out, my catastrophe is always going to be homeless under a bridge. That's
where I go.
Yeah, that's what my catastrophe is.
Is that like a middle-class cultural catastrophe? I'm sure other people have different catastrophes, but it's like homeless under a bridge.
Comment below.
Comment below. Do other cultures or
anybody
age groups or anybody else with a different demographic have a different fear? Like Armageddon, an asteroid pounding the earth. Like maybe that was my son's nightmare. That's what he thought was going to happen.
That's right.
So I guess at his age, that's it. Maybe someday it'll be homeless under a bridge, but right now it's an asteroid crushing Earth.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
And even being homeless under a bridge probably would be all right.
You got shelter.
Shelter. It's fine. It's all good. I guess maybe being murdered would be worse. I don't know. Yeah. Thanks, Ulland. Now I'm catastrophizing my new future.
It's not my fault. You're in your mind. I'm not.
Oh God, get out. But yeah, so there you go. There's the point of being one mindful. So what we're experiencing in the moment, and I want to say too, it's not just the pain of the present moment. Sometimes it's the joy of the present moment. Mm-hmm. If we're so much in the future worrying about like the other shoe dropping, I think people get into patterns where they believe that bad stuff always happens. Bad stuff happens in threes, or I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're not in the moment enjoying the moment, because you're waiting for the bad thing to happen, which the bad thing is going to happen because bad things happen.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly like fearing the bad thing, I think about this when I go on like vacations. I get so excited for the vacation and I'm like, we're on the way to vacation and we get to vacation and there's all the stress of unpacking and undoing and da. And then you get there and you get all settled in and we got 5 days together. It's going to be awesome. And then by day 2, I'm like, oh my God, we only have 3 more days together. Oh my God, I got to go back to work in 2 days.
I just are packing tomorrow.
Yeah, I got to do the laundry so I can pack to go home, And then when I get home, I'm going to have a week's worth of work waiting for me when I get home. And in the meantime, I've completely missed out on the fun of the moment because I'm so worried about it ending. Mm-hmm. So again, one mindfully rationale, multitasking is ineffective.
And we've pretty much covered that one.
Yeah, no, I got an example.
Okay.
Of multitasking. For me, cleaning the house. If I could just focus on one task, I would get it completed. And I would feel so much better than when I start doing dishes, but then I hear the laundry buzz and then I stop doing the dishes and I go move the laundry from the washer into the dryer, and then I go back to doing the dishes, but then I get distracted because there's like a spot on the stove. So then I start cleaning the spot on the stove. Well, you know what? Then I have to go to the bathroom because I'm human. So I go to the bathroom and then I realize, oh my God, the toilet's dirty too. So then I clean the toilet and I still have a sink full of dishes and I don't feel like I've gotten anything accomplished. That's multitasking to me.
Mm-hmm. And then you wonder why I am a slave driver for podcasts. Like I gotta do one thing and do that one thing, and I get so obsessive about it because I'm an NP and I know if I don't do it, it never is gonna get done.
Yes.
So it has to be like singularly focused. That's how I end up being like one mindful at the expense of everything else.
Also, for those of you who are listening who don't know Ulland, he's really into the Myers-Briggs. When he says he's an NP, that actually has significant meaning. I'm also an NP, but very, very different NPs. We'll have to do a whole podcast on Myers-Briggs, which we're not going to do today.
I wouldn't sell the farm on it. You know, there are questions about just like validity and everything like that. But I think like for me, it makes sense. I fit my type. I know other people fit their types, and some people don't fit their type strongly. But if you know that somebody does, can be helpful for understanding perspective and getting along and working well together.
Right, in communication. And then the other rationale behind one mindfully is that life moves quickly. You know, and I think I talked about that. I don't know if I talked about it in this podcast or the previous one, but like the phases of your children's lives, like, you know, like, oh God, I can't wait till I get out of this phase. And then you're waiting for the next phase to be over. I remember that, you know, even as a kid, thinking like, well, when I get out of high school and when I'm into college and, you know, things will get better then. And then I'm in college and that has its own specific sets of challenges. Mm-hmm. And then, oh, it'll be better when I'm in, you know, when I'm out of college and I'm living independently and I'm on my own. And then I'm living independently on my own. Oh, it'll be better when I actually have a significant other. Mm-hmm. So we're always like moving into like the next phase and really not being mindful in the moment of what's actually going on. And next thing you know, you're 40 and having a midlife crisis that sends you to grad school.
That sounds like an experience that someone in this room has had, potentially.
Maybe.
So you seem familiar with that statement.
Totally.
So we wonder how to one mindfully. So be present to the moment. The past is over and the future is not here. You could really do one thing at a time and be present for that and do it well. You know, also, you know, letting go of distractions, internal and external.
And for me, observing and describing that I am distracted. Like, wow, I'm really distracted today. Okay, now I have to be more intentional about what I'm doing. So fully throw myself into, no, I don't care that the washer buzzed. I'm going to finish this sink full of dishes.
Yeah, I had that experience recently in console group, just being like entirely distracted. And I don't think I've ever been, I can't remember a time I've been like that distracted in the moment. Like, I'm really trying to come to terms with that, like trying to figure out like why I was distracted, but I was all over the map. And it felt uncomfortable to be there, but like I'm just kind of witnessing in the moment and it lasted for a long time. I mean, other people, which is nice, you work with sensitive people, so they notice like that you look distracted, but you know, just to be with that, like you said, this reminded me of that, like, yeah, here I'm really, really distracted. I'm all over the map and then trying to not be distracted while focusing on the fact I am distracted. It's a weird idea.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important, especially in therapy or whenever you're actually trying to connect with someone else. You know, our minds, they're just, you know, they're fast and they get distracted fairly easily. I mean, I know that sometimes I'll be having a conversation and my brain will be thinking about the last resident that I just saw. I'm like, oh crap, I just missed that because I was distracted. But I recognize I'm distracted and bring myself back to the moment. And that's really what mindfully is all about, how do I bring myself back to this moment. So then the next house skill that we're going to talk about is effectively. And so the rationale behind effectively, like why would we do effectively? Well, if we're being effective, we're actually getting closer to achieving our goals. We're going to reduce our suffering and we're going to increase our long-term happiness. So doing that whole like just enough.
Yeah, and the goals, I would tend to suggest like they're not the immediate goals we're talking about. Typically the goals we're talking about are like our long-term goals that are in line with like more of our like our values. It's not just what's easy in the moment is not a goal. Doing what's easy in the moment generally is we're choosing something slightly harder to do in the moment, but that's in line with our long-term goals.
And then when we talk about wise mind in the next podcast, I think effectively will really make a lot of sense because when we choose to make a wise mind decision, we're choosing to do what's effective, not what's easy.
Right.
Or even for a lot of our residents, choosing to use a skill instead of doing what they know like technically works, like biologically works, or the avoidance that works. Is like, how do you choose to be effective? You know, time and time again. It's hard.
Totally. Also, if we're being mindful and doing that effectively, it reduces suffering.
So how do we be effective? How do we do effectively? So again, it's doing what is necessary for long-term goals, but in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk a lot with the residents about what's your why? Why are you doing this? Like, why would you want to tolerate suffering when avoiding has been your mode of operandus lately? Like, why would you do it? What's in it for you? And a lot of times they focus on external reasons, like, oh, well, my mom and dad, or I don't want to be a burden, or because I want to be able to go to college. That's a good one because we can kind of tap into that one, but it's still pretty extrinsically motivated.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to bring them back to what is their intrinsic motivation for doing this, which we can talk about when we talk about like commitment strategies and things in future podcasts, but they really need to know their why in order to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're doing effectively, or when we're being effective, we're focusing on what works. So what works, rather than, the whole cutting off your nose to spite your face thing, getting stuck in the rightness of things,
Mm-hmm.
or like suspending the rightness of things and doing what works.
I think also want to try to play by the rules is important, like for which can be the context of that situation in particular, that there's a certain way to go about it. How formal is it? How informal is it? Is that the kind of conversation you have? Like, are you in a business meeting? Or like, there are certain rules and you have to kind of play by those rules.
Right. And then choosing to act skillfully, which again, choosing to act skillfully, you kind of have to know why. What's your long-term goal? What's your objective? What are you working toward? And then letting go of willfulness. That's really hard to do sometimes, because when we get afraid, we get willful. And we kind of talked about that when we did our podcast on turning the mind and willingness. How do we let go of being willful? How do we let go of, and almost, I think for a lot of people, it feels like they're giving up control.
Mm-hmm.
And a conversation that I often have with residents is that you're not really giving up control, you're gaining control. Because when you're doing these more impulsive or short-term relief type decisions, it's actually your emotion mind that's in control of you.
You're kind of out of control.
Right. You're actually out of control, but you think you're in control. So, I have a resident right now I'm working with restricting. Well, she doesn't want to target restricting. She doesn't, she feels really willful toward targeting restricting. And so we kind of had to have a conversation about that. Like, why are you so willful, toward it? And she's like, because I feel like I don't have any control and I can control that. So then we start talking about, what that actually looks like. Are you actually in control right now? Because if you were in control right now, you would choose what's in your long-term goals.
Well, I think too, and this could be wrong, I'm just thinking this in the moment. I sometimes think that there's this confusion between when someone says, hey, I'm doing this behavior, like that's not really within my long-term values, right? But I'm doing this behavior so I can be in control. The confusion is, I'm actually asking you to do something difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm asking you not to restrict, I'm asking you to eat healthily, which has its own anxiety with that, body image issues with it possibly. But ultimately, if you've been restricting and now I'm asking you to eat, healthfully, you're going to feel emotions more intensely, and that's going to feel punishing.
Right.
So eating becomes associated with emotional punishment. So that's actually harder to do. And often parents and power structures are asking people to do things that are harder for them to do than something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it means that, I need to be in control. That can be really a different language of saying, please don't ask me to do something that's difficult. In this moment, I don't feel like I can, I want to have control over choosing not to do something difficult.
Correct.
So I think if you validate, that having control, like, I know this is difficult. So validate the difficulty of what you're asking someone to do. Even if it's something they have to do, we all have to eat to survive. That can be extraordinarily difficult for some people in that moment where they're at. Validating the difficulty of it and not getting into a power struggle, I don't think it's really necessarily about control.
Right.
And I had read, in some books on eating disorders, like that the dynamic is often thought, well, it's a control issue. And then I read this one book where it's like, it's not a control issue. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because most residents I've worked with, or even inpatient eating disorder patients, it has been about control the way they describe it, but it might not be control like the way we think of it, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for her, she's the one who identified it as, I don't feel like I have control over anything else. And this is something I can control. I can't control that I'm in residential right now. I can't control, conflict with my parents. I can't control a lot of things, but I can control this. And of course, we talk about the connection between that and inhibiting emotions.
Right.
So, it's a bigger conversation. But then we talk about that letting go of willfulness. A lot of times if we feel like we're going to lose control or we no longer have any say-so or input in our lives, we can become kind of willful.
Mm-hmm. I think it's different, the control issue. So the way that you, in the eating disorder, often the highly perfectionistic, apparent competence individual who has an eating disorder, that the control you described makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that I have control of something when nothing else feels like I'm in control. And then there's, I think, control that comes up for individuals in treatment where they've actually been overindulged as kids.
Mm-hmm.
So like limits haven't been set. They've been allowed to do what they've done. They've gotten really nice things as though a parent is, on some level, looks like they're kind of buying their love a bit. Like it's hard to relate hard to connect with my child. So, I'll give them what they want. Now then that will give me this type of relationship with them. And then those residents talk about control, but it's different.
Right.
It's that they're not used to being frustrated by rules and limits. The other ones are over-controlled.
Right, yeah.
They're over-controlled by everything, but that's partly an internal process for them. And then the ones who deal with control, they're actually under-controlled and don't know how to let an authority help set some limits and structures and to follow those, because that feels like they're being controlled, but actually they actually kind of need that. Right. Whereas the other person actually needs to be less controlled.
Which is why I think this is a good conversation probably for another podcast on like behaviorism, because it all comes back to figuring out the functions of behaviors for individuals in the context of their lived experience.
Right.
So for everybody, you and I could have the exact same behavior and it could have completely different function.
Absolutely.
So good idea for future podcasts, sir.
I'll write that one down.
So this has been the how skills. So this is how we do the what skills. So
hopefully we were effectively doing it, mindfully doing it.
Non-judgmentally?
Yeah, the question mark there.
That's a question mark.
I think there was some judgment in there.
Maybe a little bit.
Some bad words.
And we were aware of the judgments.
We were.
And chose to be effective anyway.
Yes. So this has been All Therapists Are Jerks with Ulland
and Jo.
Thank you for listening.